Alright guys, so today I'm going to be talking about the FNAF 2 movie, specifically about the blueprints, the schematics that were seen in the second trailer. With the most notable detail, of course, being that it says version 3.0. So the question we're going to be answering and looking into is, what are the other versions? What's 1.0? What's 2.0? Now I think the most obvious interpretation that almost everyone has is that version 1.0 is Withered Freddy, aka Unwithered Freddy, and then version 2.0 is Toy Freddy. And yeah, this interpretation is pretty simple and makes a lot of sense, of course, since the unwithered animatronics would have been 1.0, and then they would have been broken down and become the withered animatronics, and the toy animatronics would have been designed as version 2.0, and then the toy animatronics would have eventually been retired, and then the classic animatronics would have been made as version 3.0. And yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense, and it's very simple, and it's very likely that this is the direction the movie is going to go into. Or is it? If this is the direction they would go, that means that the very popular, or kind of controversial at the same time, retrofit theory from the games is not possible. It's not canon to the movie universe. If you don't know, the retrofit theory is basically the idea that since Phone Guy / Ralph says that Fazbear Entertainment started retrofitting the older animatronics with the newer technology, the classic animatronics were retrofitted into the withered animatronics with new suits, but then the retrofitting was cut short, so the unwithereds were never finished, they were never completed, and they were never on stage. They were just a new design to replace the classic animatronics, which was scrapped in favor of the toy animatronics. The withereds were never on stage. Now, I don't really want to fully get into this because it's a very controversial and just very deep topic, but I personally never believe this. Maybe the classic animatronics did exist before the withereds and were first, but I think the withered animatronics were definitely used and were on stage because the way Phone Guy / Ralph describes the way that the retrofit was done, it really just seems like they only started adding the technology from the toy animatronics into the withereds. And Scott came up with this to basically show the reason why the withered animatronics attack the player with the whole facial recognition thing. That newer technology from the toy animatronics was carried over to the withereds, and that's why they attack too. And it also explains why the Freddy head trick works on them too. But then with Foxy, you could also chalk it up to that part of the programming not being added to him because the retrofitting was cut short. Also, according to the retrofit theory of the FNAF 2 Night 2 phone call, apparently Ralph / Phone Guy was referring to the new unwithered designs being so ugly, which is the reason why they went in a whole new direction, because those new designs that replaced the classics were just so ugly. But I feel like that's adding random information out of nowhere, and then he was just talking about the old original unwithered designs being ugly. Because he never mentions anything about new suits being given to the withered animatronics in the retrofitting, and he never directly calls the retrofitting as the reason the characters look ugly. He also says that these older models that were from the previous location that are now being used for parts, they were originally going to be repaired, so I feel like that assumes that these animatronics were withered in the old location, although I highly doubt it was to the extent they are in FNAF 2, but they were originally damaged and then they were going to repair them, but they just didn't really do it. And yeah, in the games there's evidence of the classic designs being used before the withereds and all that, like with the FNAF 1 pizzeria layout and the prototypes of the classics in Secret of the Mimic and all that. So I do think it's likely that the classic designs, or maybe an early version or two of them, were used in the early days right after Fredbear's closed. But I still think the unwithered animatronics definitely existed and they were on stage at some point. So how does this all connect to the movie timeline? Since version 3.0 is the classic designs in the movie blueprints, that means the withered animatronics came first and the classic animatronics did not exist before them. However, I still think it's definitely possible that a slightly altered version of the classics are actually 1.0 and then the withered animatronics are version 2.0 instead of the toys being 2.0 and the withereds being 1.0. I think it's low, but it's possible, so let's look into that. The main piece of evidence is again looking into the games and the books with the backstage Freddy design. In FNAF 1, in the backstage camera, there's a weird looking Freddy Fazbear head on the shelf. These weird looking Freddy Fazbear heads. There's a couple of them actually. And in the Week Before book, it's eventually revealed that these are from the old location. These are old designs of Freddy Fazbear. So the idea is that 1.0 is actually an early version of the classic designs. Maybe something related to Backstage Freddy or something. No!
You're so ugly,
And then the Withereds are version 2.0. And then for version 3.0, they basically took the designs and cues from version 1.0 and made the classic animatronics. Now you may be wondering, where does the toy animatronics fit into all this? Where are they? Wouldn't one of them be the toy animatronics? Now since the toy animatronics are very different and they're kind of separated from the original designs, with them being made of plastic and having rosy cheeks and all that, they're separate schematics. Basically there's toy animatronic schematics, they're all separate, so they'd be a Toy Freddy blueprint instead. So yeah, the retrofit theory could exist in the FNAF movie timeline. However, I do think it's very unlikely. Again, since this is the movie's timeline, it is very different from both the games and the book timelines. There isn't really much evidence for there being an early version of the classic designs being 1.0 instead of the Withereds being 1.0. We do have the Freddy torture chair, but he's more in line with the classic designs version 3.0, so I don't think he's version 1.0. He's pretty old, but I don't think he's 1.0 old. But something we do see in the FNAF 2 trailer is the Freddy Fazbear head. Well, it's the Freddy Fazbear mask. It's more in line with what we see in FNAF AR and Help Wanted, kind of, because those are more based off the classic designs instead of being the withered design and a whole head as it was in FNAF 2. And my question is, how would this have ended up in the FNAF 2 location? It wouldn't really make sense. One possibility is that it's actually the version 1.0 Freddy design, and that version 2.0 actually is Withered Freddy, and then version 3.0 is Classic Freddy. But the head doesn't really look that different from Classic Freddy version 3.0. It looks almost the exact same. There is no eyebrows, kind of like Backstage Freddy, so maybe it is Backstage Freddy, but the head shape still looks almost exactly like Classic 3.0 Freddy Fazbear. I don't think there's any other differences really. But since we don't have much to go off, there's a small possibility that it is version 1.0. However, another explanation where this is not version 1.0 is that this actually is the version 3.0 and it's either just some spare head, or it could actually be Freddy's head from the first movie, that classic design, version 3.0 from the first movie, that animatronic. He was actually moved to the original location and then had his parts swapped out and then became the 2.0 design, Withered Freddy. And then his original head had its face ripped off when he was being repaired or when he was damaged. And yeah, I think either of these two 3.0 explanations could work, and I think it's more likely that this is version 3.0 and not version 1.0, an early version of the classic design. It just makes more sense. If it was an early 1.0 design, I think there'd be more differences than just the eyebrows being missing. So do I think version 1.0 could have been an early version of the classic animatronics? I do think it's possible, but from what we have right now with the evidence, there's not really any, so I think it's very unlikely that it is. It's definitely possible, but you've also got to think about how many sets of animatronics that Blumhouse and the Jim Henson Creature Shop are going to make. They've already got to build and manage the toy animatronics, the withered animatronics, and whatever hoax and Easter egg animatronics they're going to add. That's nearing like 13 animatronics already, and you got to think about if the first movie animatronics are going to appear, or if the classics are going to be withered in this movie after the events of the first movie when we see them again. And then maybe the toy animatronics are going to be damaged by the end of the movie. And then there's also the unwithered animatronics on top of that as well. That's 5 sets of the main 4 animatronics. 20 animatronics in total. There's no way they're going to make that many, right? So then on top of that, are they really going to make 1.0 an early version of the classic animatronics? Are they going to make 24 animatronics? And don't even get me started on the withered versions of those 1.0 early animatronics. Are they going to do them? There's 28. There's no way. There's no way. I can see them getting away with not doing that one. But still, 24 versions of the main 4 animatronics? That doesn't include any of the extra animatronics like the Easter eggs, or the Golden Freddys, or the hoaxes. So unless they like cheap out or something and make them more CGI, or just costumes, or just parts that they can swap out for the existing endoskeleton chassis, even if they use those alternate methods, it's still going to be really expensive and a lot to make and manage. What you've got to think about is which one of those other animatronic sets are they going to make or not make. I honestly think a 1.0 early versions of the classics are just off the table if you consider all that. Now, I already went into this in my other video talking about if Withered Golden Freddy is going to appear in the FNAF 2 movie or not, so if you're interested in this topic, make sure to check out that video. Just one extra set of the main 4 animatronics is already really pushing it. Whether that's the Withered Classics, the Withered Toy Animatronics, or a version 1.0 early version of the classic animatronics. So I think that's the final nail in the coffin for the retrofit theory existing in the movie timeline, with the 1.0 animatronics being an early version of the classics. I don't think this is going to happen unless they just don't show the Withered Classics at all and save it for the third movie, which is possible, but 1.0 being the Withereds and 2.0 being the toys just makes so much more sense. Although the toy animatronics are very different from the traditional animatronics like the classics and the unwithereds, using Toy Freddy as an example, Toy Freddy is still a version of Freddy Fazbear. He's still known as Freddy Fazbear, and the restaurant is not called Toy Freddy's Pizzeria. Although the toy prefix might have been added internally in the blueprints to further differentiate the version 1.0 animatronics from the version 2.0 toy animatronics, I think that's how it will be done, so the toy prefix can be introduced into the movie universe, and that's how the characters will distinguish the toy animatronics from the other animatronics, but I don't think it warrants the toy animatronics getting their own separate blueprints. And there's not really any evidence in the movies for there being an early version of the classics. That Freddy head, it really just looks like classic Freddy's head to me. It doesn't look like a prototype or an early version of the classic design. I think it's just a spare head, or more likely, it's the exact head from the exact same Freddy we saw in the first movie after he was changed and repaired into Withered Freddy. Going into that idea of the classic animatronics being rebuilt into the Withered animatronics, are the classic animatronics we see in the first movie going to be the same as the Withered animatronics we see in the second movie? Although to me, the blueprints, the schematics, they kind of give off the vibe that all the different versions are completely different endoskeleton designs and technology, especially if version 2.0 is Toy Freddy. It's not supposed to show version 1.0 being retrofitted into 3.0, I just don't get that vibe. But what I do think is that these blueprints could have been used to quote-unquote fix the classic animatronics into the Withered animatronics. What I do think is that there's a heavy emphasis in the trailers of the classic animatronics returning, with Abby really wanting to see her friends again. What I think is that Abby somehow took the classic animatronics to the original FNAF 2 location and then failed fixing them up using the 1.0 blueprints and parts and all that. And maybe even parts from version 2.0 the toy animatronics were used, kind of like what I was saying before with the retrofitting in the games. When Abby or whoever adds parts from the version 2.0 animatronics into the classic animatronics to turn them into the Withereds and try and fix them up, that's the reason they attack and are fooled by the Freddy Fazbear mask. And again, Foxy, he isn't fooled by the mask because they did not add that part of the technology into him. Now, I'm not sure how involved Abby, Mike, Vanessa and all that are going to be involved in fixing up and bringing the classic animatronics to the original location and then fixing them up with the withered parts, but maybe even the classic animatronics could repair themselves. But even if they do, I do think Abby will be involved to an extent, judging by what we saw in the trailer with Abby missing her friends and wanting to fix them up. The only flaw with this idea is the whole thing with the missing children and their bodies. The first movie directly called out that the missing children's bodies were definitely inside the classic animatronics at that time. At least that's my interpretation of what was said in the movie. So if the classics got repaired, what would happen with their bodies and all that? It's just kind of weird thinking about that. Now, this was also an issue in the games, and it wasn't really explained what happened in the bodies. So since the games didn't really go into it, maybe the movie won't go into it. But then again, the movie and the games, separate timelines, and the movie directly calls out that the bodies are inside the classic animatronics. And in the games as well, the original 4 animatronics were possessed when they were both withered and as the classic designs. While in the movie universe, the kids were killed in the first movie location, and they were always the classic designs. They were always in that version 3.0. They were never the withered animatronics. And the thing is, what were the withered animatronics before? What happened to the withered animatronics? Were they actually retrofitted into the animatronics we see into the first movie? Or is it like the retrofit theory, where they just never existed and were never on stage? They were just spare parts that were just never used. And I'm not sure if their history is really the same as it was in the games. Like I said before, the withered animatronics in the games, my interpretation is that they were broken in the previous location before they were moved to the FNAF 2 location. However, in the FNAF 2 movie, we learned that the toy animatronic location is actually the original location. There was not one before. It was very clearly stated in the trailer.
This is the original.
So were the Withereds on stage at that location, but it was rebranded with the toy animatronics at some point? It would explain why the Withered animatronics, or at least their parts, are there in the FNAF 2 movie. It would definitely explain that. And we also know that the toy animatronics are not the original animatronics. They are not the original Freddy Fazbear and Toy Bonnie, at least as far as we know. Maybe they are, but I highly doubt it, because then why would the Withered animatronics exist? Maybe they came after the toy animatronics, and the toy animatronics are actually 1.0, and then the Withereds are 2.0, but they were just never used? It just doesn't make sense though. If you go down that route, it just doesn't make sense. Another possibility is that the Withered animatronics performed at Fredbear's Family Diner before being moved into the parts and services room at the FNAF 2 movie location with the toy animatronics. Now, in the games, in FNAF 2, Phone Guy talks about trying to get in contact with the original restaurant owner, and then names Fredbear's Family Diner. So maybe that's also where the Withereds came from. That's the previous location he was talking about. But I see that as unlikely, since he says he loved the old characters in the phone calls. So he would probably know Fredbear's Family Diner 100%. He would probably know the past with the Withered animatronics if they performed at Fredbear's Family Diner in the games timeline. And then on top of that, there's the newspaper. I'm probably gonna have to do another video analyzing the newspapers, but there's the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza grand opening newspaper, and you can't see the toy animatronics in the photo there, so I do think that this was where the unwithered animatronics did perform at. They definitely did. Maybe they did perform at Fredbear's before, but they definitely did perform at this restaurant. I'm pretty certain of that. Now, we do have the carousel, and in FNAF 2, in the games, that has the dark blue Bonnie instead of the bright blue toy Bonnie, and it's clearly got the original red Foxy. And in the FNAF 2 movie, Bonnie looks more like Toy Bonnie on here, but that's clearly the original Foxy, the red Foxy on there. That's clearly him, so that must mean the original animatronics did perform here at some point. Now, this is making me question the Withered animatronic timeline in the games, because although Phone Guy says they are from the previous location, the carousel has old Foxy and old Bonnie on there. So maybe they did perform at that location, but then it closed down, and then they had the grand reopening then? And then they also did perform in the previous location, which is most likely the same pizzeria as the first FNAF game. But then the previous location line from Phone Guy doesn't really make sense unless they just brought in the old carousel from the old location, or the carousel was made during the retrofitting process when they were originally going to reuse the old Foxy, the old Bonnie, the old animatronics, but then they decided to go in a new direction and just not replace the carousel. I think either of those explanations work, so I do think that in the movie and possibly the games as well, the withered/unwithered animatronics did perform at the FNAF 2 location. Now, what I only have a partial answer to is why the withered animatronics were damaged and withered in the first place, and why they were taken off stage. Did Golden Freddy sabotage and damage them to try and get his place back on stage? Now, in the games, I don't really know why they were damaged and needed repairs in the first place, but we do know they were replaced because the company wanted to go in a different direction because they thought the withered animatronics were ugly and they didn't like the smell of them. As for the movies, I don't really have an explanation. Maybe the withered animatronics weren't damaged at all, but they were replaced because the company wanted to go in a different direction with a new design, and because of William and Henry's advances in technology. And since we don't know much about the withered animatronics, there's still the possibility that the withered animatronics just aren't the classic animatronics at all. The withered animatronics were just never upgraded into version 3.0, the classic designs. They were always just kept separate. And this would solve a lot of the problems we had before with the children's bodies inside the classic animatronics and the classic animatronics being rebuilt into the withered animatronics. That would solve a lot of problems. They just wouldn't exist. However, you'd have to answer the question on what happened to the classic animatronics, really. You want to know what happened with the kids' spirits since they're heavily important to the plot, so what happened to them? It's possible that their spirits, their souls, their consciousnesses were all transferred to another body from the classic animatronics to the withered animatronics somehow. Maybe like part of like the main circuitry in the head of the animatronics or something. I don't know, that's possible, and that would really solve a lot of the issues with them being the same as the classic animatronics, and would also still mean that they're still technically the same characters and all that. But would it be that easy to transfer the kids' spirits to another body? It's not as simple as Golden Freddy inventing some small box device that can save, copy, and store the consciousness of any animatronic or soul, and upload or transfer those consciousnesses into a new or different body. At least for the average animatronic or person like Abby or the classic animatronics. There is one character that can kind of transfer and put souls into a new body. The Mimic! The Mimic looks different in 1979 compared to 20... No. William Afton can completely change his suit and corpse from Springtrap to Scraptrap. No. Of course we're talking about the puppet here. The thing is, if the puppet did it, then how involved would Abby be in that plot? Maybe the puppet had already somehow done it, and then Abby finds out, and then she goes to the original location. But then unless Abby tries to fix them from there, my idea of the withered animatronics being retrofitted with the toy animatronic parts, which is the reason why they attack and are fooled by the mask, that might not be the case. Also, there was a leak going around. If you want to not hear about this, then go skip to the timestamp. But apparently, the puppet is causing the toy animatronics to attack and go crazy on all the people around the city. If this is the case and the puppet controls the withered animatronics too, then what's the point of putting the kids' spirits in the withered animatronics? There's just no point. Even if the withered animatronics need a soul or spirit to be able to be controlled by the puppet, that would mean the kids' spirits would most likely not play a major role in the movie unless the main characters need to help and save them. That was kind of the idea in the first movie with the animatronics being clearly the victims and not the villains. Maybe it's something similar to the first movie where Abby needed to free the animatronics from William's control. Maybe this time Abby needs to free them from the puppet's control. I could see that happening, but my question is, how would they do that? I don't know how. Now, there was no confirmation that the puppet was the one controlling the Withereds too, and I don't think we saw any footage of the Withereds outside the pizzeria in the trailers, so maybe the Withereds will be evil quote-unquote in a different way compared to the toys. Now, if the puppet has nothing to do with transferring the kids' spirits from the classics to the Withereds, then is there any other way that it could be done? I do think it's possible, especially with like the newspaper talking about William's advances in technology, so maybe that could be talking about Remnant like in the games, and also connected to the games, the Molten MCI theory talking about the missing children's incident spirits being inside Molten Freddy, so maybe something like that happens in the movies, but then I'm not sure if the Remnant transfers the memories too. I don't think it did, especially with Molten Freddy. There's no indication that he has the memories of the missing children's incident, really. I don't think there is. Maybe it only works the first time because the animatronics in the games, they know who they are. They know they were killed by William Afton, so they have some form of memories. But then if the Remnant is taken out of that animatronic and used elsewhere, then the memories will disappear. I don't know. But Remnant, of course, could work differently in the movies, and this is definitely a possibility. Now, although it's unlikely, what if the kid spirits from the first movie just aren't put in the Withereds? They're completely separate. If that's the case, then are the Withered animatronics possessed by different children or something? Are the toy animatronics even possessed at all? Or is it all just the programming with the facial recognition or something? I really don't know, because it doesn't seem like there was some sort of dead children's incident like the games. The trailer only mentions some little girl dying here, which is Charlie Emily, of course. Unless it's Cassidy, or even less likely Elizabeth, but possibly other kids did die there, but we just don't know. The characters didn't know. Since in the trailers it does look like that William did try to lure some victims into the back room with the spring Bonnie suit, but then Charlie did save one of them and then most likely died after that. But Charlie's death as well, that was ruled as an accident according to Henry.
Everyone called it an accident, but it wasn't until years later when those 5 children went missing that I knew she was murdered by him.
And I don't think Henry told Liz and all the other characters about Charlie's murder at that point in the scene in the movie, because she just says some girl, not Charlie Emily.
Some little girl got murdered here.
Unless it's actually not Charlie that she was talking about, I have to assume that she inferred that William actually did kill Charlie and that it was not actually an accident. It was actually a murder. So that statement might not necessarily mean that Charlie was the only murderer at the location. Maybe Charlie was the only one that was known and found. So maybe there was some kids that did die at the FNAF 2 location, but they just weren't known. In the games, there was the dead children's incident in the Save Them minigame, so it's pretty likely that the toys were possessed in the games. But then again, the games universe is separate from the movie universe, so maybe that doesn't cross over. Assuming the Withereds are not connected to the classics from the first movie, I have 2 possibilities. One, the Withered animatronics and the toy animatronics are not possessed and they attack because of the facial recognition and the programming, or because of what I was talking about before with the puppet. Another possibility is that they are possessed, but then William Afton just took them from other sources like we saw with Garrett. He just snatched them from wherever he could. The thing is that no matter where the kids were sourced, if the Withereds are possessed by different kids, that's an additional 4 victims on top of the 5 that William Afton would have to do to possess the rest of the toy animatronic cast. So unless he set up an AFK farm with like Circus Baby or something, I don't see him getting that many kids. I don't see him doing that. 5 is already a lot. I don't know, he could, but an additional 4 victims on top of that, assuming that they were all killed around the same time, bringing the total up to 9, that's really pushing it. It could happen, especially if it's inside the pizzeria, but if they were kidnapped like Garrett, then I don't see that happening. But wrapping up this section, I do think the Withered animatronics will be connected to the first movie classic animatronics. Not sure if they're going to be the exact same animatronics themselves, but I think they definitely will be the same kid spirits because they played an important role in the first film and the trailers really emphasize Abby missing her friends and wanting to fix them up. So in the end, what do I think about the Withered animatronics in the FNAF 2 movie? How will they be handled? With the design blueprints, I do think 1.0 will be the Withered animatronics and 2.0 will be the toy animatronics. The Withereds most likely performed at that original location before it was rebranded with the toy animatronics. Maybe they also performed at Fredbear's alongside Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, but at this time I just don't think they did. After the original location with the toy animatronics closed, maybe the Withered animatronics were turned into the classic animatronics and their parts were left behind at that original location. Or maybe they were just left behind for all their tortures to unwind at that location. Then, a year after the events of the first movie, Abby misses her friends, so she goes to fix them and turns the classic animatronics into the Withereds. Whether that's using the parts from the Withereds and transforming the classics into the Withereds, or transferring the spirits into the Withered animatronics, she will most likely fail to bring them back properly, which is what causes them to attack. This could also be a result of the toy animatronic parts being added into the Withereds. But the Withered animatronics will act differently from the toy animatronics, and they will have a separate villain role. And that's how I think the main 4 Withered animatronics will be handled in the FNAF 2 movie. Now you may be thinking, what about Golden Freddy? Will he be the withered version as well, or will he be the same as the first movie, the classic design? Like I said earlier, Withered Golden Freddy already got his own video because that's a whole other can of worms. And I did kind of go into this whole thing about the Withered animatronics in that video, so if you want to hear more about that, then check that one out, and hopefully I'll see you guys there or in another video. Bye.
Yeah! Wicked!